Roger that. Oh, the last hour, suddenly things were happening. And I didn't get to have my ceremonial, quiet before the storm. Iridium Kush first, he wins a prize. Turns out I'm being restreamed on another channel. So I'm in two places at once, it would appear. Okay. But I'm on a schedule here tonight, so I cannot rewatch myself. Not that I particularly want to. But so we're looking at co-parenting with a borderline this time round. Before it was with a narcissist. I'm gonna play a little tune, get my notes up, ready, get myself settled down. I've got a coffee, allow some time for other people to walk in, and then we'll get started. So, can I remember what to do? Share screen, I think. Yep. And Chrome tab, audio library, share the audio. Bada boom, and I selected a number. Was it this one? Right, I'll be back in a minute. I quite like that tune. Get us in the mood. Right, get rid of that. Get us. Is that right? No. There we go. Okay. I hope I didn't mess up the. No, I didn't want to do that. No. How do I make it zoom out? Oh, there we are. Technical difficulties. Hey there, MGTOW. Why am I saying MGTOW so much more lately? MGTOW Outlaw, Mr. Hemi. Good evening, good afternoon, gentlemen, and Iridium Kush again. Hello. Okay, so this co-parenting with a borderline, in comparison to the other stream with the narcissist, I think this one is going to be a bit more useful or a bit more insightful, because we're going to kind of be referring to the narcissist in a comparison. Basically. So we will, on top of hopefully getting a better understanding of how to co-parent with a borderline, we will also get a better grasp of what is the difference between a narcissist and a borderline. So I'm expecting this to be a little bit information heavy. You might want a notepad, jot down a few ideas. Let's begin with a little introduction. So again, like a little disclaimer, this isn't a definitive guide. There are going to be overlaps. There's going to be some nuances, so don't take it too literal. And quite often you might have heard me talk about before that sometimes it doesn't really matter what kind of mentally ill handicap, I mean, you can argue, is it really a handicap or disorder you're dealing with? But on this occasion, in terms of co-parenting, it is, I think, important to know what it is you're dealing with. So having a distinction is a bit more important, essential, rather than the sort of generalized, like, look, you're dealing with someone who is destructive in their nature. So a quick overview then. So the narcissist is more deliberate, they're more manipulative, even though, again, it applies to a borderline, but they have their own uniqueness about them, their own sort of flavor or spin with their manipulation. The narcissist, generally speaking, has a hidden agenda. They have an objective, albeit like they might not be aware they're actually doing it. There might be an unaware narcissist. They are evasive to accept any accountability or blame. The narcissist is, again, generally speaking, is looking for people to have as slaves or servants. They don't even look at people as people. They are utensils and objects. They want a narrative, a fantasy. They want an outcome from it. There's got to be a goal. So their involvement in terms of relationships is a much more hell-bent style, war, essentially. So when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you're pretty much at war with someone, someone who is defiant, who is out to be disruptive, etc. Because you're not really fighting the narcissist per se as a person. You're fighting the narcissism within them. So it's almost like a battle on with against two on two fronts. You've got the person who is along for the ride, the body in which the narcissism is inhabiting, which is what you think your opponent is, but really your opponent is the spiritual sense of the narcissism that has taken over this shell, this body, which is why for a lot of people it's very difficult to combat, because it's like fighting ghosts. Now here's a particular point to make, because the borderline will have their version of it. So the narcissist wants to be perfect, that they want their pristine bubble as a reflection of their own sense of perfection. So they already feel like they're perfect. There's nothing wrong with this narcissist. So everything in their life must be perfect. So you can see why there's such a need for control. And you might hear me now and again sort of say, like, look, dealing with a narcissist is pretty simple. Once you understand the general mechanics of how they function, operate, the mode of operandi, it's pretty much cut and dry with a narcissist. There isn't really, I mean, you can do deep dives, but that's just for, it's just for, it just like, it's just additional, isn't that interesting kind of information? It once you know how it goes, you can deal with a narcissist pretty simple. That's not to be demeaning or to be like lacking in sympathy towards people. Obviously, it's still a tricky situation, but this cut and dry aspect with the narcissist. I mean, it basically boils down to this, like they are perfect, and you are not perfect. you are the muck beneath their shoe. And for the narcissist, this creates a sense of stability. Actually, it's pretty. This dynamic creates a sense of security for them, provided they can actually maintain it. So this keeps the narcissist tickety boo, keeps them going. So, all right, that's the narcissist. The the BPD, sorry, is much more in desperation. Now you could say this as well for the narcissist, but for the BPD, it really is a frantic desperation of despair, really, and trying to cope the best way they can. So this isn't really a proper way of phrasing it. Maybe I could phrase it a bit better, but the BPD is much more monstrous in a way, like lots of rage. I mean, again, the narcissist has rage, but the BPD rage is more like the narcissist rage is typically founded in the need for control. So like their meltdowns, but the BPD's rage is much more wild, much more monstrous in a sense. However, they're not as insidious or evil, if you want to say that word, as the narcissist. They haven't really got that hidden agenda, as it were. They do sort of, but it's not as malicious, shall I say. They can be, but there are these caveats. So in this comparison, the BPD wants to be a child. They want to be looked after, and they are lost within their own story. This narrative we were talking about before, like the narcissist has a fantasy perception. Well, the narcissist is trying to create this fantasy and keep it maintained, whereas for the BPD, they are lost within it. They are lost within their own story. And so the BPD seeks out perfection in others because they cannot get perfection from themselves. Now, can we see the difference there with the narcissist? So the narcissist already thinks of themselves as perfect. The BPD wants to think of themselves as perfect, but they can't. So this is why both people will look for perfection in others, but their reasoning behind it differs. Some argue that the BPD is a failed narcissist, but that's a debate for another time. So the involvement with a BPD in terms of a relationship is much more chaotic. A total flux of instability with ups and downs, a real roller coaster of a ride. I mean, again, you get that with narcissists, but with BPDs, it's much more amplified. It really is an emotional roller coaster. So this is why when it comes to breakups, like with a narcissist, cut and dry, it's pretty much over. If there's still ways to exploit you, to extract the fuel, then you'll continue to have a narcissist in your life causing trouble. But if that separation is final and there's nothing for them to extract, maybe either because you've been depleted completely or you managed to put up boundaries and they no longer have any access, they're gone. You're not going to see them ever again, most likely. However, with the BPD, this emotional artifact, this residual turmoil, ongoing, even though they're not present anymore, will be much more detrimental to the spouse or partner. So you can often tell, that's one way of telling what kind of person you've been dealing with post breakup, is by how much trauma the survivor or the victim or whoever is going through. If they're in a real mess, their emotions are all over the place, then there's a good chance they were dealing with a BPD. But if they realize that, hey, I was abused, I was cheated on, they swindled me, and they've moved on with their life as if I don't exist, then that sounds more like a narcissist they were dealing with. Now, during this, so a little additional disclaimer, during this conversation, we are not going to be factoring the narcissistic component built into the BPD. I'm not sure if all of you are aware of that, but there is with BPD, there is a component within that of narcissism, but it operates in a slightly different way than the conventional narcissist that we're usually talking about. Typically, it comes in a form of the defensiveness. So when a BPD is cornered, they're on the back foot or something like that, then this narcissism will come to the surface to their defense. And we're also not going to be talking about the comorbidity of borderlines, because usually, statistically, if someone is a borderline, it's usually comorbid with some other, maybe like a mood anxiety disorder, maybe depression, maybe they're bipolar or something. There's usually other things to, lack of a better word, to complement the borderline. So to kind of summarize our little introduction here, try and keep this in the back of your mind if you're trying to, like, are we talking about borderlines or narcissists? It gets all confusing. So the narcissist wants fuel, supply, and control in order to keep their fantasy, to bring it to life. They are the greatest and you are beneath them. They want all the cookies. Yum, yum, yum. Gimme, gimme, gimme. All the cookies are mine. The BPD is lost in their fantasy and in search of rescue. And this is why they're like a child. They think, am I a cookie? Or maybe I'm a cracker. And I feel bad. Right? And in comparison, a healthy person would be, these cookies taste nice. Would you like one? Ooh, I think I've eaten too many cookies. Maybe I should go on a diet. Okay? So mental disorder described as cookies. Right. Now let's get into the more meat of the conversation here. So why does a borderline have children in the first place then? Loosely speaking, impulsivity. Emotions bring them to this point. They think it's a good idea for a sense of fulfillment and meaning. And this is in part to counter this chronic emptiness they have inside. Maybe I should have started off with a quick rundown of the criteria of a borderline. But borderlines have chronic emptiness because they have this confusion. They have no idea who they are. They're like, am I, what am I, sort of thing. So a real problem with their identity. And you could argue in a way, a lot of these colorful, vivid type of people nowadays, these identity questionable, I don't know, like today, my pronoun kind of thing, are showing signs of borderline type of behavior because of this trouble they have of self. They don't know who they are. The narcissist in their mind clearly knows who they are. They're the greatest. They're the god. You know, they're the emp. I don't want to say that the emp word, but you get what I mean. So the narcissist, in comparison, what the narcissist has, as we covered before, wanting children, it becomes a function that feeds back into their ego. But the borderline does this instead in search of meaning, a sense of completion. Now, here we have, so a difference here is meaning, and for the narcissist, it would be status. And when I say meaning, it's this sense of completion and fulfillment. But for the narcissist, this status equals significance and importance. Either way, they're not having children for the sake of actually having children, to create a life so that this child can enjoy what life has to offer for themselves. Is to serve emotional needs and requirements. So already not really on a authentic or legitimate kind of premise. Now I've got some sort of like paragraph titles. I'm not sure they're in the best of orders, but we'll just plow through them anyway. So next up I have here is idolize. So this could mean, so in terms, so let's say you're the parent and your partner you're trying to co-parent with is the borderline. What kind of information will be pertinent to your situation? Well, this can mean that the child is being praised in excess or disproportionately. They're not being praised or disciplined or any other kind of treatments in an appropriate amount or way. Everything is distorted with the borderline. A narcissist, in comparison, again, dictates. They dictate the meaning of value. You know, your function is what it brings, or what you bring to the narcissist. But with the BPD, the meaning is lost. So this won't help children create their own value structure or value system, because things become inconsistent. You see, so as bad as this might sound, at least with a narcissist that maybe enslaves their children, the children eventually get it in their head that, oh, I'm not worth anything, and I deserve my mistreatment or abuse or something like that. You know, like the scapegoat. Eventually the scapegoat will realize that, oh, I'm to blame for everything, it's all my fault. Whereas a BPD child will be confused. They'll be like, well, one minute I'm the center of the world, I'm the what's that saying, the apple in my eye or something like that, or you know, I'm being loved so much so, and then the next minute I'm being shunned and I have no idea why, what's going on. Everything is so unstable or unstable, inconsistent. So the kids, for example, might be looked at as being perfect little angels until the anxiety of the BPD starts to creep in. Remember that emptiness, that sadness. And then, unfortunately, because what could then happen is that the children start to trigger the shame or the sense of failure within that BPD parent. So, I mean, the narcissist instead won't think that they're at fault or a failure at parenting. No, they'll blame the children. It'd be like, you're a brat, and no wonder you're a dirty little rascal. It wasn't my doing. It's, you know, you're the demon seed or something like that. But the BPD will want to push the children away because of this. The meaning, the symbolism of the child is reminding the BPD of how much of a failure or how bad of a parent they actually are, which will be internalized by the children because the children won't understand what is going on. So the children will start to feel like that. Well, the children will start to feel like the happiness of my parent is their responsibility. So now the narcissist may see you as a perfect supply, however, they will still maintain the higher position. I mean, it's like if you're a perfect supply, the narcissist is the super perfect. But they do this so that they can devalue, that there'll be that devalue later on. Now, the BPD hopes you'll stay perfect and has trouble holding that image of you. So they don't look at people as people. Again, similar to like the narcissist, they don't look at people like actual people, independent, autonomous individuals. The narcissist sees you as a utensil, as an object, but the BPD sees an image of you, like a photograph is often how it's described. And this photograph gets tattered up, it gets worn out, and they have trouble keeping this. That they want to look at this photograph and keep it preserved, but try as they might, it starts to fade. And this is where they have trouble holding on to this image of you. But this will come back again later on. We have to, but this idea of when you see people as an image, as a photograph, this isn't really seeing you for who you really are. So yet another distortion of perception going on. Okay, let's move on to impulsivity then. Now, with the narcissist, we say that they're slaves of their emotions, but this is more truer with the borderline. Really the borderline is a complete slave to their emotions. So although the narcissist is they're pushed by their emotional needs. The BPD is pulled along by their emotions. And that's just one of the differences there. Yeah, I see Falcon's in the building. Guys here, welcome Falcon. Great guy, great content creator. Check out his channel. Tim, I see you're here. Good to see you, man. Single Town Bachelor, good to see you here. Silver Bullets. Douglas, everybody's coming in. Great to see you all. Hope you're all doing well this evening. It's a little bit chilly. Ooh, warming up by some candles. Now, so the impulsivity, right? Now, one of the symptoms, if you want to say, is that this impulsivity will present itself as being indecisive, wanting opposing things at the same time. How many of you have heard, I hate you, come here, I need you, for example, the push and pull? In terms of children, now going back, so every so often we'll go back to reminding us, because we're dealing with co-parenting. This isn't strictly just about borderlines and narcissists. We're actually trying to focus on the co-parenting aspect, how this affects the children. In terms of the children with this push-pull, impulsive, indecisive dynamic, you can see the borderline perhaps will play with the children, seemingly to having fun with the kids, but then in a swing of a pendulum, suddenly feel sad. They want to play with kids, but at the same time, they don't want to play with kids. You know, you see this contradiction, and this is the dilemma of the borderline. They want it, they don't know what they want, and they want it both ways at the same time. But that doesn't work for the children, because the children have no idea. Like how does a child navigate with this inconsistent, indecisive, not knowing which way, left or right, up or down, both at the same time? I mean, it tears the children apart. So the borderline can't make up their mind. And this extrapolates further out, because this has become very problematic, because then you can't make concrete choices. You can't say this weekend we're going to go to the fun fair, and then at the same time say, no, we're going to change plans. We're not going out at all, or something like that. It's like, are we going out or aren't we going out? What are we doing here? Are we packing our bags or aren't we packing our bags? You know, so. And that can even, like, you can see random expenses appear, like sudden shopping sprees, or maybe random partners being introduced into the dynamic family structure, or sporadic sort of activities. It's just, there's nothing concrete going on with it, with the children's with parental planning. It's all on the fly. So that would be something to consider when it comes to the parenting or parental aspect of dealing with children with a borderline parent, that instability and that impulsivity. I mean, we still got other things to cover here, but already we've got major problems in the upbringing of the children. And obviously this like sympathy goes out to any people in this sort of predicament. It's not going to be an easy one, obviously, and you're trying to do the best that you can, but we need to have a bit of, like, if we're not laying out the potential hurdles and obstacles and challenges, then you're not going to be able to equip yourself to then manage and mitigate against them. So I apologize in advance if some of this is like, oh my God, how on earth am I going to deal with like the impulsivity, indecisiveness? Well, the first step is to acknowledge and be aware that that is something that's going to be a challenge that you're going to have to deal with. So the sense of self, okay. So the narcissist has a distorted view of their self. The children, so as a result, the children do not see an actual authentic parent when it comes to the narcissist. Instead, they see a symbol of a parent. The children model, so what the children learn eventually from being with a narcissist parent is they model the behavior that being someone fake or different is the way to go in life. Being who you are authentically is not how you should be. So the children are conditioned not to be authentic when living with a narcissist. In comparison, the BPD struggles with this fragmented sense of self because of splitting. You might have heard of splitting before. Life is meaningless and they feel a chronic emptiness. So the children see what they learn from a borderline parent is they learn confusion and a person struggling for stability. And they start to learn that this is the normal way of coping. So as the children grow older, they'll learn that the way to deal with stressful times in life is to split and become unstable. So a bit, again, another daunting one to hear, I'm sure, if this is in your situation. Now, as much as you might like to think you know them, like the borderline, and as well as the narcissist, or you might like to think that this article, this video, this stream presenting to you right now is helping to explain it all, bear this in mind. You do not know the borderline. You can't know the borderline. As much as you like to think you do, you're trying to work them out and all this. We're going over their style and etc. You do not know the borderline as much as you like to think that you do. Why? Because the borderline doesn't know the borderline. Because that sense of self hasn't come together. Is the word consummated? I think it hasn't been. It's shattered into pieces. It hasn't been mushed into a singular entity. So there's no way you could possibly know the borderline. What you know is you're seeing the individual fragments scattered about. You're not seeing a complete person. So there's no way that you, as much as you like to think that you know who you're dealing with and you can figure them out, technically speaking, you can't. You can only sort of make predictions with a margin of error because you have to allow for this unknown factor. Despite their patterns and their cycles, they are inconsistent. Going back to earlier in the stream, they're inconsistent. So you can't rely or guarantee that they're going to stick to these certain patterns or cycles. It's like gambling in a way. You can make a bet and you can hedge your chances, and you might be, generally speaking, quite close to being accurate, but you don't know for 100% certain. This is the nature of instability, this chaotic randomness. Okay, let's move on to control. Oh, if anyone's got any questions, please kindly write question, capital letters followed by a colon, state your question and have a question mark at the end, and that makes it easier for me to spot it in the chat. So control. All right. The narcissist, despite sometimes appearing not in control, actually the disorder is geared for seeking control. Much more so than a normal person. So if ever, this is kind of like a little tangent, but if ever you needed someone to take control of a situation, get a narcissist to do it for you. They'll get control. So in that sense, I mean, despite being self-destructive and all this, the narcissist actually achieves this controlling feat. Otherwise, if they weren't, if it wasn't successful in gaining control, then their narcissism would be failing them, and they probably wouldn't really be a narcissist for very long. So there is a success rate with narcissism and control, unfortunately. Now, the BPD, in comparison, finds this far harder to do. They are continually struggling for control. I mean, as soon as they have control, they lose it. So as a result, going back to the children now, so the BPD struggles to parent because they are too preoccupied by their emotions and this instability and everything constantly in flux, out of whack. And the narc, however, can be a little bit more focused with their parenting, if you can call it, even if you could call it that, because the narcissist is trying to achieve something, even though it's not proper parenting, it's enslavement, but they're at least focused with this objective. Now, it might be a bit difficult for the narcissist to prolong this play acting, but they can do it. And then a quick little point about like meltdowns or the narc injury, because we're talking about control here. So the narcissist may have a narc injury or a rage, and this is to re-establish control. So the rage, the meltdown, red pill rage, you might want to say, is a way of re-establishing control. Not necessarily saying that red pill rage is a narcissistic trait, but under that lens, that's the way it would be looked at. The BPD has a more animalistic meltdown. Their loss of control is much more berserk. And the BPD does have a anger component, a rage component that gets unleashed, and that's usually triggered by their survival mechanism. I see a question. You didn't write question, but is God a narcissist? Ooh, no pussyfooting about with that one. Well, Red Scout, I'll highlight your comment there. Is God a narcissist? It could be arguable. It is argued that Jesus is a inverted narcissist. But yeah, maybe that will be a topic for another time. You might end up opening Pandora's box if you make me go delve it into that. There are quite grandiose. I don't think God is in denial much, but he is a bit controlling. It depends. What are we talking about? Like the singular entity God, like Christianity type of God, or what? How many different gods are there, kind of thing. But doesn't he say something like, "You will worship me, but no one else"? That's quite controlling. Good question, anyway, and we'll probably get a lot of people in tizzy if we were to have it as a topic. But I think it deserves to be one. Very good question. Anyway, we'll get back to this, because I have another 2 and a bit pages to get through. And I don't want to make this too intricate, otherwise, the bullet points won't be taken on board. And I'm trying to provide a bit of a service to the parents dealing with borderlines. So I have to keep reminding myself to focus this conversation on parenting of the children and how all of this plays into effect. Let's now look at lying, telling fibs, naughty, porkies. So the borderline, even if they're trying to be honest, you don't really know if what they're saying or doing is coming from their emotions doing the talking, or if it's like rationale, sensibility, a wise decision. I mean, generally speaking, it's coming from the emotions anyway. So even if they're trying to be honest, there's probably a distortion with that honesty, if that makes sense. Like the narcissist is more malicious, as we were saying before, right? But and you could say like they're heartless in a way. The borderline isn't like that. They do have a heart. They do want, they can be very empathetic. For example, they can want the best for people, and they try to be kind. But we have to remind ourselves with this problem of they are flooded with emotions, so it's disproportionate. Like when they love you over and above, which means that it's a exaggerated form of love. So this isn't really, so you're not really being loved in an appropriate amount, or what would be suitable. Now obviously it might feel like nice to be loved in excess, but hopefully you can start to realize that if you are being loved in excess, like an exaggeration, then it's kind of like, could you dial that down a bit, please? It starts to feel uncanny, or it feels ungenuine or inauthentic, because it dilutes it decreases the value, or dilutes the meaning or significance of that love if it's just over the top, without any restraints or containment. It's just dished out willy-nilly almost. Like, you open a door for someone and they go, or you hold a door open for someone and they're like, oh my God, I love you so much, you're my soulmate, I wish I died and we spend the rest of eternity together. You'd be like, whoa, slow down. What I did was hold the door open for you. So even if the borderline is trying to be honest, you don't know if it's actually, well, more than likely it is their emotions amplifying it. So therefore, nothing they say can be taken as accurate. The borderline might not realize that they are distorting the truth. So unintentionally, they may end up lying or breaking their word. However, they do have a bit of awareness where if you explain things to them, they may show some remorse. Now, how long they'll be able to hold on to that feeling and remember why they feel sorry is a secondary question, because they, let's say they cheated on you. You told them afterwards that, hey, listen, that really hurt my feelings. I don't like it when you cheat on me, because you make me feel, etc., or whatever. They for a brief moment see it from your point of view, and if they feel genuinely sorry, they got true remorse, and they feel ashamed of themselves. But then 3 days later, they're out cheating again. So, I mean, that comes with a little bit of object constancy, but they got fleet because their emotions are constantly fleeting. Here's another little fun fact. So the borderline can never quite attain true happiness, nor can they quite attain true rage. For example, they could be blowing up, furious, angry, monstrous, but then you say, "Hey, check it out! I found a £10 note in the street. Here you go. You have it." Suddenly, in a flip of a dime, they're elated. What happened to their rage? It's gone. So they can't hold on to their emotions for very long at all. And likewise, they could win the lottery or whatever, be over the moon, but then they broke a fingernail, and now, oh my God, the world has come crashing down. I'm miserable. I'm depressed. What's the point of life? Blah 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 blah. So that's how it. In contrast to a bipolar person, the bipolar has the ups and downs, right? Some days are manic, and some days they're in mania. Is that the same? One's high and one's low, basically depressing. The borderline has ups and downs, several of them in one day. That's how turbulent their emotions are. Just up and down in the span of 30 minutes, an hour. You never know where you stand emotionally speaking with borderline. Now, continuing on with the lying section here. So the narcissist fakes love. Let's look at my notes. They can choose to play dumb and dismiss. So although they may present as being an unaware narcissist, let's say, they don't realize they're a narcissist. It's subconsciously driven. There is an awareness in that subconscious. So you could say that they are aware that they are a narcissist. They just don't want to acknowledge it, and instead they know what they're doing is wrong. So that shows an awareness. They know that they are being deceitful or deceptive, and they're doing things which wouldn't be like socially accepted. But with the narcissist, they have an element of entitlement, so they can justify this exception as their speciality. It's like one rule for me and one rule for thee and not for me. So they know socially something might be wrong, but see, they can say, but in my situation, in my case, it's okay. Everyone else, they should be condemned. And of course, this helps prevent them being accountable and caught out and then losing control. So this is part of that control mechanism. And again, so the narcissist uses lying as a tool for control. The borderline may lie, for lack of a better excuse, as reckless, by accident, unintentional. They might not mean it. They of course, there might be times when they do mean it. They deliberately lie, but they could be a little bit off the hook, so to speak. I'm not saying it's justifiably okay and you should forgive your borderline for lying to you. No, it's just to put into a little context that sometimes the borderline doesn't even realize they're lying because their feelings are facts, so they believe it to be true, whereas the narcissist more or less knows they're lying. They do it with intent. So then from lying, we can now talk about trust issues with a borderline. And we begin here from the borderline's perspective. With everything being turbulent, unstable, they have fear of abandonment, chronic emptiness, emotions roller coaster, pulling them along. They, as a result, unfortunately, they have trouble trusting, and you can quickly see why. They don't even know reality is reality anymore, because how they can't trust their own senses. It gets to that sort of point. And because of this problem with being able to trust things and to trust people, it can cause them to behave accordingly, often in a negative way. So if we look at the fear of abandonment as a subcategory, this makes them push you away. So they sabotage the relationship because in their mind, they're convinced you're going to leave them. So to avoid being abandoned, they decide, well, I will instigate the abandonment, and that way I won't hurt as much. So they sabotage a relationship, they push you away, and they deem you, in their mind, that image, that photograph they were so fond of moments ago, you were Prince Charming. Well, now you are Lucifer. Your photograph has transformed and you are now unsafe to be around. And there are people's sort of accounts where they talk about that fear of abandonment can be so great, so strong, that you can't even go to the toilet without the borderline wanting to be in the toilet, the bathroom with you at the same time. Or if you're late home from work, they're assuming that you must be out cheating on them or something like that. So the borderline is so attached. Well, really, we could talk about attachment styles. I mean, they're not really attached, but they're so clingy because they're so worried what's going to happen without you being there. And remember from earlier that the borderline is a child, is an infant. So the infant wants. That means you're not looked at as a spouse. You're looked at as a parent. By the way, in all of this, so the child doesn't want to be away from their parent. So as soon as you leave the room, the borderline is where are you going? I'm coming with you. And obviously that can be very annoying and disruptive and unhealthy ultimately. So what does this tell us? That the borderline has trouble with rationalizing. They misinterpret signals and meanings and phrase. They are very confused with communication. They have poor judgment. This will result in the borderline most likely interrogating you. I want to know everywhere you're going. I want to know exactly what you're up to because I can't trust you. I have problems with trust. So I need this reassurance, this constant reassurance. And that becomes a drain. It's like, yes, dear, I'm here. Like, don't worry, chill out. Imagine doing that constantly. And in that interrogation, the answers they're looking for. By the way, I'm going to use she as the borderline in this example, in this conversation, just because he, she, whatever. I'm just going to say she. So in this interrogation, she will likely want your answers to align with her beliefs, because if you say something to the contrary of what she's already thinking or already believing, then even more reason why she shouldn't trust you, because now you're lying to her. Even if you do tell her something that is in alignment, she's not going to necessarily trust it, or because of that fear of abandonment. Now this cascades into problems now where she becomes restless. So she has a lot of anxiety, she has a lot of stress, she's hypersensitive, she becomes vigilant, she's nitpicky, she's looking for faults, and she's looking for confirmation that her world is basically imploding. And what she would call is her truth. So she's already made a sort of conclusion in a way. She just needs to verify that her beliefs are true. So there's a good chance that she's not going to be sleeping very well. She's not going to be eating very well. She's going to be panicky. She's going to lash out, and she needs that constant soothing and reassurance. Bringing this back to the kids now, how is that going to? How would you imagine that plays out trying to look after children? A mess. A mess. It means the children aren't being put first. It means the borderline is so preoccupied with all this problems, Pandora's box of problems, that she cannot be, or he cannot be, an effective parent, really. Even in the briefest of times where things might be beneficial for the children, because it's mixed in with this destabilizing, this contamination, in some ways it makes the situation even worse, because it's choppy. At least with the narcissist who's being abusive, even the narcissist sort of love bombs and mixes good days with the bad. But the point I'm trying to make is that at least if you are being abused flat out, you can kind of quickly orientate yourself to what's going on. You'd be like, this is hell on earth, I need to get out of here, or this isn't right, or whatever. But with the borderline, it just makes it so much more confusing. So I mentioned object constancy before. See, the borderline hasn't learned this. So when the borderline is cheating, for example, because you're out of sight, you stop existing. So when a borderline cheats, they're not thinking about you. You don't exist. So as far as they're concerned, they're not really cheating. They're single. However, with a narcissist, they have not forgotten about you. Although they will be focused, they might not be thinking about you like predominantly, because they're more focused on extracting the fuel from the cheating person they're with. But they know you exist in the back of their mind. They know they got a spouse back at home that they're cheating on. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. So we'll quickly look at the world collapsing, the fantasy world collapsing. Now, when this prospect comes along, the narcissist will jump ship. They'll monkey branch. The borderline tends to panic instead. So the narcissist isn't really going to exert much effort in trying to salvage a relationship. They're kind of lazy bones, and their narcissism will push them off to find fuel and supply elsewhere. The narcissist also has a problem with trust, because they assume everyone is just like them, because everyone is an extension of them. So if they are untrustworthy themselves, they're going to assume everyone else is the same and think it's normal. So when the narcissist cheats, their way of justifying it is like, well, you're just like me, right? So you're just as deceitful and you'll backstab me, so I may as well cheat on you. It's like, well, no, not everyone's a narcissist, Okay, so let's now talk about self-harm and suicidal ideation. That's a characteristic of the borderline. It's on that checklist. Now, hopefully, children, aren't exposed to any of this type of behavior. because they all learn, if you're not careful, that this is how to cope when times are hard. Now, according to statistics, borderlines have a higher rate of depression and feeling overwhelmed and stressed and confused, we mentioned already. And this is coming from that high expectation they have of themselves. Remember, before we're talking about they seek perfection in other people because they're trying to get perfection from themselves. So they're coming from a place of ultra low self-esteem. They don't like who they are. They wish they were better. They wish they were perfect. And as a result, it creates this plummet in their feelings of self-worth. So this failure to meet the high expectations they have of themselves causes a problem. So they attack themselves, basically, put themselves down. They feel crap about who they are, and they deserve to be punished, and they deserve to be miserable. And this can put them off with being, spending time with the child, because they have a little bit of a realization where being, not to sound unkind, but being grumpy boots, being suicidal around the kids is probably a bad idea, so this can put them off wanting to be around the children. And in some case, in which case maybe it's actually a good thing that they are pushing the kids away. In this sense, it's a little bit like protection. And that's another aspect. I think I mentioned it in my notes later on about this overprotection. But the general point I'm trying to make here is that the borderline has a propensity to want to see things negatively, which isn't, if you wanted to be a positive parental guardian, figure in your children's life, then being pessimistic and negative isn't really going to be, you need to be a better example than that if possible. But anyway, so because we're talking about suicide and self-harm, so you may hear of borderlines are the type who are prone to cutting, like they cut their skin, or other forms of self-harm, addiction, gambling, shopping, their eating, whatever, takes many forms. And these are ways to help regulate and give them a form of stability. A tangent, here we come with another tangent, talking about stability. So the narcissist has what they call at least one island of a locus of self-control. So not all narcissists will cheat on you, my friends. You might think that, they all cheaters. Not necessarily. If they are getting fuel or supply, and it's a stable connection, then they're going to maintain that. Now, usually this will be a job environment, and everything else in their life will be turbulent. So as long as they got one area of their life that is normal, stable, then they're good, sort of thing. They're a happy narcissist, if you can say that. However, with the borderline, zero island of control. Everything in their life is in chaos. Their work, their family, their relationships, their health, their finances, it's all turbulent. And in fact, the way they stabilize their instability is by introducing even more instability. I don't know how that makes sense, but that's how there was this joke in The Simpsons when Mr. Burns was getting ill, and the doctor was like, your illnesses, they depicted it as like monsters or whatever. I can't remember if it were monsters, but like bugs that were trying to fit through a door. And Doctor, what's the doctor's name? I've forgotten. Dr. Hubert or whatever. He was saying that because you've got all of these bugs trying to go through the door at the same time, they kind of block each other's path, and none of them can get through. So it's a little bit like that, I guess, with the borderline. By having additional instability, it irons out the wrinkles or something. Anyway, let's move on to interactions. Now, this would be a bit more pertinent to the children, I think. So you kind of, because of that problem of misinterpreting and not having the social cues or literacy to understand other people's perspectives, etc. It means when it comes to the children, they need a lot of teaching. You know, it's quite literally like pick up your kid, stroke their back, burp your child, okay, give them a goo-goo face, all right, tickle their toes. You know, you have to kind of spell it out for the borderline because they won't know they don't know how to conduct themselves otherwise. When the baby's crying, it's not because they hate you, it's because they want some milk. Go warm up the milk, give the baby some milk. Make sure it's not too hot or too cold. It needs to be, warm. Don't rely on the borderline to instinctively know how to conduct themselves, because they have that problem of misinterpretations. So the borderline has trouble identifying emotional needs in other people, and they can mislabel. Let's say it like someone is a neutral kind of emotion. They're not really happy or sad, but because the borderline has this negative lens, life is negative for them, they'll assume that, oh, this neutral face is a sad face. And here in my notes I have where I've written, so they could become overprotective if not too careful. Now, with all this instability, we said it a few times now, so they have difficulty structuring activities with the children, and in part because they fear making any mistakes. So they will more likely not really plan to have any activities with the children, because in the back of their mind, they're going to make a mistake. So in terms of confidence level as a parent, this makes them feel less confident, less capable. They don't feel successful as a parent, less satisfaction from parenting. And all of that is coming from this fear. Lots of fear with a borderline. They assume the kid's schedule is running on the borderlines, because they have. So they assume, like, the borderline wakes up, does their activities and goes to bed, right? So they assume the kid is going to follow their pattern of behavior, and they're not aware of the child's own patterns or schedule, as it were, throughout the day. So let's say the borderline is in the mood for playtime, but the kid isn't. Well, the borderline is going to try and make the kid have play, and then the kid isn't going to be too happy with that. And then the borderline is going to think something is wrong with me here because I'm making my kid sad. Well, I'm not going to play with my kid anymore. And now the kid wants to play, and now the borderline is not in the mood for play. So we can see how their schedules are mismatched. Now, what will help both the child and the borderline is to reduce stimulating things. Lots of toys is a bad idea. Keep it simple. 1 or 2 toys is better. having things in the background, TV's on, stereo is playing, iPad is on, lights are flashing. That's too much stimulus and inputs going into the mind of both the borderline and the child. So they can't focus or be present with their emotions. They're being torn apart. And obviously, because it makes sense why the borderline would be overstimulated, because they've got all this fear and anxiety in the background that is, well, their emotions are pulling them along. So this adds to that disorientation and instability, because they are just swamped with so much things happening. Now, if we can reduce that and make it a bit more clearer for the borderline, we can help the borderline to a small degree, and in turn that will make them a more effective parent when it comes to the children. And this is why you may notice that borderlines are they like music and art, because, well, they have a particular interest with music and art because they are expressive forms. It's like a language that doesn't use words. So it's fantastic for a borderline because they can communicate through this medium. And they are also very abstract. So they don't need to be precise with the definition of loneliness. They can just, in an abstract way, depict what they're feeling with whatever in their art form or the type of music or something. But so with that bit of knowledge, if you were to try and regulate a borderline, they need to cut down on the music and art and poetry, like the things that stimulate them in this abstraction sort of style, because that's not going to be helping them. They probably won't like that and will probably be like, no, I need my music, it makes me feel better. And it's like, that's the problem. You're needing music to dictate how you feel. And yeah, so this adds to that problem of a borderline will struggle quite often with the communication of how they feel. Ask them, how do you feel? And they might be a bit perplexed. They'll be like, well, I feel sad for some reason. I don't know. Is it sadness? Maybe depression? Maybe I'm feeling a bit, I don't know. I'm not sure what the word is. But in terms of the children, this means that the child doesn't really build their literacy of emotions, and they lose out on this explanation. So as a parent, and we can all be a little bit guilty of this, but we need to be careful when we say things like tidy your room, and the kid says why, and you answer back with because I said so. That doesn't help the kid. You need to be more honest with the child. I put my hand up. I've been guilty. I'm sure I've said that because I said so. But be honest, more clear, more precise. Like tidy your room. Why? Because it matters. Having a clean environment is good for you, so that you don't get ill. So that you have an organized space. When you've got an organized space, your mind will be more organized. That little extra bit of care and attention to details like that clarifies for the kid, and makes it helps the child to understand why you telling them to clean their room is so important, instead of you just saying because I said so. one day your kid will turn around and say that to you, and then you'll be like, oh, what kind of little mouth have you got on there? And it's good to check in emotionally with your kid, right? To make this communication a two-way street. Now, it doesn't mean to say that you use your child to emotionally regulate you. It just means that if you're feeling sad, that you communicate this with your child appropriately, of course, and you explain why the sadness is it's bothersome or why it's making you feel a certain way, and you open up, have a more honest two-way street with your child, so that they see you as a human being as well. Try and keep things positive and inspire optimism and praise where you can. And in doing so, you'll get much more positive results. If you be negative, doom and gloom all the time, well, guess what kind of results you're going to get from your kid? Okay, now we're coming up towards the end here. So what can you do as a parent? All being said, learning the cycles and patterns of behavior, obviously, will be a good one. No guarantee, it's just more awareness, the better position you'll be. You as hopefully the stable figure in the relationship, but it will be questionable because you have been dealing with a borderline, so automatically we are going to assume that you need some work, some inner work of your own. But if you can be a stable role model and provide routine and stability, continuity, you remain calm, cool, decisive. Jot it down if you're taking notes. That will help, because if you're not, the borderline will also pick up on that and think it's okay. So you're not only being an example to your children, but you have to be an example to the borderline, unfortunately, because remember, the borderline looks at you as a parent as well. Now, without perhaps realizing, because of the emotional, like, immense pressures the borderline is under, we can't minimize. I mean, it is super occupying them, impacting their life, not just their life, but those around them. There'll be a good chance that the borderline will try to nudge your focus to look after the borderline instead of the children. To prioritize the borderline over the kids. Now, you can't be expected to do that, unfortunately. So this will be at the dismay of the borderline, and it will be a effort on your part, because I'm sure the borderline will be more demanding than the children are. So you can expect that if things are to blow up or get out of control, get hysterical, meltdowns, or anger or rage, you don't want the kids to be witness to that, if at all possible, right? So in a way, like, this is said with a caveat, but in a way so that means you have the power in the relationship, sort of, because you're supposed to be the parent of the borderline. Now you can achieve this power or control by signaling your authority and putting your foot down. Now, bearing in mind, you can't stop the borderline. They are out of control. They're going to do what they want to do, but you can manage to a small degree. So you can put your foot down, not to punish the borderline, but rather to keep them in check, to regulate them. So, like we were saying before about spelling out how babies are feeling, and etc., where you spell out the boundaries and the parameters of how this co-parenting is going to take place. You say, this is when you can contact me. This is when you can't contact me. This is what is allowed for the children. This is not what is allowed for the children. Do not rely on the borderline to make the executive decisions in the family, right? So imagine leaving a kid, a 2-year-old or younger, whatever, in control of the household. You wouldn't do it. So don't let the borderline do it. All of this will be a lot easier if the borderline is aware that they're a borderline. They've been diagnosed as BPD. However, to get this diagnosis isn't something, it's not your job to point it out to your partner and say, hey, I think you're a borderline. Really, you would maybe at the most is kind of hint, hey, do you think maybe you might want to see a counselor? And you'd fingers crossed that the counselor would make the suggestion that a further assessment be done. So try to resist flat out calling your partner a borderline, or if they have been diagnosed with BPD, to rub it in their face, as it were. Now, I know you might not like them or approve of their behaviors, but you don't want to make the situation worse. You don't want to make them feel even less about themselves, because well, think how it would play out. So it's not your job to point this out to them, and it's not your job to be their sponsor or caretaker, even though they're trying to recruit you as one. So really, this means the borderline needs to be getting help elsewhere. And obviously, like CBT or DBT therapy might be helpful, but again, this isn't, it's not your duty to provide it or to organize it. And this is part of the borderline needs to grow up in that regard and take a little bit of responsibility for their own well-being and see to it themselves to go on to pursue such therapy. Otherwise, they're only going to go to day one and then they won't bother go to the rest of it. So they need to have a bit of self-interest to want to stick with it. Okay. Now, be mindful of yourself here. As touched upon moments ago, there's a good chance that you yourself will need a bit of inner work. And there's a good chance that during this process of trying to figure out the borderline, trying to figure out the situation, what do I do, and all of that, in that process, you are self-reflecting and you're trying to calibrate. Be careful with this, because in that process, without you realizing it, there's a good chance you are splitting. You are taking on characteristics of the borderline. You're saying, what is it I need to do? And what have I done? You see that split? There's a before and after. There is like a present or past version of you, and there is a future version of you. Splitting. And when you do this, you try and attach or stick these viewpoints, these images to yourself, and neither one of them is actually you. Like when you think, what am I going to do? How am I going to behave or conduct myself? You are idolizing, you are thinking of a perfected version or an optimized version of yourself. But that's not really who you are. It might be who you become. But at this point in time and juncture, that is not you. So because you are envisioning an optimized version of yourself who doesn't yet exist, That means you abandon who you are right now in favor of who you potentially could become. So in this splitting, if you're not careful, you will start to lose your sense of self. You won't know who you are anymore because you don't want to be the person in the past and you're not the person in the future. So where are you? Now, there's also a good chance if you've been wrapped up with a borderline that you have a what we call a savior complex. And at least in the past, you wanted to be a caregiver to your partner, to save them, to fix them. My love will cure them, that kind of thing. And in this pursuit of trying to co-parent with the borderline and with this talk here tonight, you might be beginning to think, how can I go forwards and with the consideration of my children as well as my borderline ex? So how can I still, without realizing you carry this savior complex, how can I become the ultimate caregiver? Because you can now see, hopefully, that there is a big struggle going on. I mean, you already knew this anyway in the past. You already knew this leading up to here that the borderline is struggling, but with the gravitas that is being illustrated out here before you, there you can see how it's like there's no hope in hell sort of thing. So they are really, borderline really is struggling, and you want to try and be a supporting figure for your family, even if the ex is now an ex. You know, it's still they still have an importance or a role to play in the children's lives. So what happens to this ex still matters to some degree, and you want to try and help and fix the situation. So you're looking. So with this turbulent situation with a borderline, you are looking for normalcy. You're trying to create stability. However, you need to remind yourselves, unfortunately, that this is not a normal situation. Having people borderline is not normal. Having people who are narcissists is not normal. It's becoming more normalized because of how messed up the world is becoming. But we need to recognize that this is not something that should be factored in as if this is common knowledge. So give yourself a little bit of a pat on the back or relief or whatever. Try not to be so hard on yourself, and think that what you're trying to achieve is something very difficult in a otherwise unnormal, unhealthy situation. So you're doing the best you can, and that kind of desire to want what's right or what's best or to try and make it work is commendable. But do not delude yourself in thinking that this is normal and this is how life should be. You wouldn't want your children to grow up thinking that this is normal behavior and getting themselves involved with a narcissist, a borderline, or whatever. So don't be fooled if you start seeing things becoming more stabilized. This could just be part of the cycle. And do not have hope, sorry to say, that things will change for the better. Be weary of seeing potential, as in you now idolizing the situation. And unfortunately, what that will mean is you will forever be on your toes, wondering when things will blow up. The only certainty you can have is knowing there is no certainty. I'm sorry if that is the bearer of bad news, but I have to be honest with you. Now, obviously, be aware, just miscellaneous, you could be re-idolized. Hoover attempts could happen. The borderline may want to get back together with you. You break up, you get back together, you break up, cycle repeat over and over again. This isn't really breaking up. This is more like recycling. Okay, so but how can we, as the parent, go forward? Be objective, be pragmatic. You can model the relationship. You demonstrate it with your actions. After all, well, I already said that. You wouldn't want the children to be in a situation like the one you're in. So you do not want to educate that codependency and borderline is okay and normal, right? When it's appropriate, it would be better to teach the powerful effects of emotions, the powerful effects that emotions have, and how they make us do things which we might otherwise not benefit us, or maybe strange or harmful. So you teach, so you need to up your level of emotional literacy and understanding so that you can pass that information on to your children, and when they're appropriate and the time is right, of course, so that they do not underestimate the potency of their emotions. And this isn't to say that emotions are like bad, that we need to get rid of them because they cause problems. No, we need if you don't have emotions, you won't be alive today. So you need your emotions. They're very important and they can be very beneficial. It's just you need to understand them, and that means have a responsibility for them. So you can build these lessons into a child's life in various ways. Like just simple teaching responsibility. They won't even realize that will help them when it comes to understanding their emotions later on when the time is right. So remind yourself, you as a parent, you have a job to do, right? Remember, any emotional attachments or regards towards your borderline are distorted. Unfortunately, this will mean your fond memories are not really what they seem to be. They were distorted memories. You may have indeed felt at the time that you were madly in love with each other, but maybe now you'll realize that what might not have been what you thought or what you believed to be true. So the better you can remove your feelings, then the better you can function as a parent. That doesn't mean you stop having emotions. So understand the difference between your emotions and your feelings. But the better you can contain how you feel so that you don't have that impacting you or impacting your actions and behavior, then the better you can be the executive and stand in the parental position of your children. The borderline looks at their children as friends, but you as a parent are not your kids' friends. You're their parent. Your kids will try and treat you in the beginning, if they can, as a friend, because they don't want to have you parenting over them. But you make that clear to your child that no, as much as we might goof around together, I'm still your, well, in my case, a dad or whatever, So there is that boundary or distinction that needs to be upheld. The borderline does not understand this. The borderline will treat so the narcissist treats their children as fashion accessories or status, but the borderline treats their children as friends. Now, you don't need to be angry with the borderline or hate the borderline. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you can hopefully get to a point where you can just understand them and you can let that anger subside because it will only get in the way of the duty of parenting that is both in your responsibility and, unfortunately, for the borderline, their responsibility as well. So there isn't really room for hatred if you're getting on with the task at hand. And just understand that you're dealing with a person basically whose emotions heavily impact their actions and thoughts. See it for what it is. This is a person who is in dire like straits is the right way of putting it. They're lost in their own narrative. They have a fragmented sense of self. It's borderline. The definition or whatever is the border between being neurotic and psychopathic. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure it's psychopathic. But it's right in between the two of them. Not a good place to be. And with everything that's been said this evening, no two borderlines are alike. They're almost like individual diagnoses of borderline. Factor in all that comorbidity and maybe they're on medication or something as well. So we can only give a generalized guidance or viewpoint on the characteristics of what could happen, but what happens in your particular case will be unique to you and your situation. So you need to be able to take on all these lessons and information and adapt it and model it in a way that is pertinent to your situation for it to be of any use to you. Some of it might not apply. There might be things I've missed out. But with all that being said, you can't be expected to know everything anyway, and to be able to respond with absolute precision, because you're dealing with someone who is totally unstable. It's like trying to control the uncontrollable. So how do you do that? So all credit to those and best wishes and good luck and everything with those in this predicament and situation. You might find it helpful. Sometimes simplifying things is good, because then it kind of declutters your mind and you can focus on task, and then dip into the deep dives occasionally to give yourself a more fuller understanding. So a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and overall you maybe become more experienced. Hopefully you become more experienced, and your confidence in your parenting. Because if you're asking me for advice or anything like this, then already you're telling me that you don't feel very confident in your abilities. And that's no surprise. I mean, and it's very humbling, and it shows a degree of wanting to take on a responsibility and put an effort in and all this good stuff. So hats off and credits to you. And hopefully, in the future we'll have better. From what I'm understanding, there are better treatments for borderlines, or there is help available for borderlines. The question is whether or not the borderline wants to get that help or treatment. So if you're kind of lucky enough, or you're fortunate enough that your ex-partner has an awareness they're borderline and they're willing to get a bit of treatment, then there is hope that things could be a bit better. But do not put your prayers on that being like a cure to your situation, because for any changes to take place, like I know one borderline who is alleged to be a recovered borderline. It's like 8 years down the road before they are decent, before they are deemed healthy or whatever. And in 8 years time, that's a different person altogether. You don't know who that is going to be in 8 years time. So whatever cure or treatment or therapy that is on offer, don't think that this is a remedy for your situation. It's just look at it for what it is. It's what we've got in today's society, unfortunately. Hope it helps. Anyway, I'll have a quick look at the comments, and I hope that was helpful, and you've all been paying attention. I know it kind of drones on a bit. I'm looking. I see Shinobi One's here. Good to see you. Single Time Bachelor. Good to see you too. Anyone else I met? I'm looking for anyone with particular questions. I see Red Scout saying whose opinion. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. I'm sorry about that. But if anyone's got a question, okay. High pressure sodium or metal halide. Is that what's for dinner tonight? Yeah. So any questions? Otherwise, I'll be closing up. Okay, it doesn't really look like there's any questions. Okay, so thank you again. If there are any questions afterwards, you can feel free to leave them in the comment box below. Typey. Shall I shill and be like, hit the like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff? Smash the like button. Smash the like button with your codependency. Oof. I'm trauma bonded to that like button. Take out your anger rage. All right, I bid you all a pleasant evening. Let's get out of here.